I think I waffle way too much. Hey there and welcome to my latest video. So tonight I want to talk about some of the things that have enabled me to create my new manga Future Saviours. Just very briefly, some of you will have seen that the very first part of Future Saviours has now launched and you can go and read it for free. So either click the link that's in the top right hand corner of this video or have a look in the video description. But this video is going to be about the processes that I went through, if I can call them processes, that enabled me to create my very first manga Future Saviours, and whether it was the story that came first which then created the characters, or whether the characters kind of came first and then that kind of forged the story. In the main, in this video, I'm going to talk about one of my main characters, Saki Endo. Now you can see a picture of her on my TV behind me here. So let me dive into some of the processes that I went through, some of my experiences, and this may help you if you're looking to create a story, whether it's manga, a novel, a short story, whatever it might be. Maybe this will be of some help to you. I'm going to try and keep the running time down, so I'm doing a time check. It's just gone 7:05 here. Let's see if I can do this in 15 minutes or less. So let me take you back to March of 2020. I moved to Japan from the UK and I have been here ever since. Obviously I moved during the middle of a pandemic. Now my career path before coming to Japan was very different to what I'm now doing here. I now work as an assistant English teacher, a job that on the whole I very much enjoyed doing and I'm very happy doing it. So that was one of my motivations for coming here. Another motivation was that my previous career path was not leading me where I wanted to take my life, and so it was important for me to figure out how I could get back to the things that I love doing most. And the things that I love doing most are, well, drawing really. I love taking photos and so forth. I used to be a wedding photographer and I ran my own business for getting on for 10 years in fact. But it's just not been possible for me to balance having a full-time job alongside also doing wedding photography. It was just too much for me in the end. So I came to Japan knowing that I needed to create something of a future for myself in a way, which is unconnected to the title Future Saviours. So I arrived here with only 6 hours to spare before Japan closed its borders. In fact, as of today, which is 17th of June, if I tried to come to Japan on my visa that I obviously had obtained and so forth, I would still not be allowed into the country because basically Japan closed its borders on March 20th. Anyway, what followed after that was my first week in Tokyo was fairly normal, all things considered. It was a blessed relief from the situation in the UK, but of course obviously a worldwide pandemic didn't take long to catch up with Japan as well. And so when I actually moved to Miyako City, which is where I now live and still live, I've lived here since basically coming to Japan. Obviously I had to be quarantined, and then due to a medical related reason I then had to do another quarantine period. So in total I spent a month in quarantine, and then I was actually able to start working. Now the reason I mention all of this is because it's been a very tough year for a lot of people, not being able to see family, friends, not being able to get out and about, enjoy the fresh air, those kinds of things. And I think on the whole I've been very lucky in Japan, so I will say that, and I'm very grateful for it. But one of the things that soon became apparent, regardless of my aspirations to obviously get back to my drawing and illustration and wanting hopefully to potentially make a career for myself in creating manga essentially, was that over a couple of months I was soon in no illusions of just how little Japanese I really knew. I could read hiragana and katakana and I knew some real basics, but it didn't really count for anything when I actually came here. So I was really feeling that isolation. Obviously there was the quarantine periods, the fact that there was a huge language barrier, I didn't really know anybody here, and yeah, so I was feeling very isolated. And so in the background I had started actually doing some more drawing because I really needed to up my game. I was very much a lapsed artist, but aside from that, I knew at the back of my mind I wanted to create a story, to write a manga. And there's a little bit more to it than what I'm going to explain in this video, but I'm going to come back to basically everything that I've been up to in the past year as regards Future Saviours in forthcoming videos. So consider this a bit of an overview. But I put on Instagram, which obviously you can now see hopefully on the screen, a post which included a picture of Shippo-chan from Inuyasha. Time check. Oh wow, okay, 4 minutes in already. And the reason I put that on there is because I had already reached a stage where I was basically looking for creature comforts, being able to reach back into perhaps my past, things that were creature comforts to me, things that I enjoyed, and I started binge watching or re-watching Inuyasha, one of my favourite anime of all time. And Shippo-chan is this wonderful character. He's a demon, but he's basically half human, half fox, and he's adorably cute. I love Shippo-chan. And I basically posted on Instagram that the loneliness and the isolation was really getting to me. And I'd been very recalcitrant to actually be open about that on social media, about the loneliness I was facing, because I didn't want to come across as being ungrateful for being in Japan, but I couldn't deny the fact that I was feeling very isolated. And what happened out of that was I started essentially thinking of ideas of like, what can I do, because I still didn't have a story. I've had a number of story ideas stretching back for nearly 20 years, various projects, but they've usually centred around a character that has perhaps not had the best start in life, somebody perhaps with not the best qualifications, shall we say, maybe a school leaver at the age of 15 or 16, something like that, and through adversity they somehow managed to pull themselves up through by their bootstraps and make a life for themselves, kind of thing. That's a gross oversimplification of some of those ideas, and I may delve into them a little bit more when I come back to sort of some of the actual influences on the Future Saviours story. But I've had ideas stretching back to around about 2004 that could be actually recognisably traced to Future Saviours. Now, I'm not going to tell you what they are in great detail because I don't want to spoil the story. But in Saki Endo, what we have is a character who leaves school, or left school at 15, with virtually no qualifications because she flunked her exams, and there's a very good reason for that, which will be explained actually very soon in the manga. So we've already got some idea of what that is with the part that you can read online now, of why she might have been distracted at school, what kind of problems she had in her life. So Saki Endo is very much a product of ideas stretching back for, well, I suppose that's 16 years if I can do the math correctly on the top of my head. In fact, 17 years, isn't it? So, so the ideas for Saki were kind of there. I started doing characters that all of you will know. So anybody who knows me will know that I have a great deal of affection for Lama, one half, Lama Nibanuichi. And so I drew this picture of Lama and Akane for the Star Festival last year. That was the 7th of July, 14th of July. I'm reading the dates wrong, because obviously Japanese order. And so I was enjoying doing this, but I still was chasing my own original story, my own ideas, my own characters. And what happened is because I was watching Inuyasha, I wanted to reach back into quite a recent time for me that was very happy in Japan. And I was thinking back to that first week I had in Tokyo, which was very precious to me, a very warm feeling that I still have about it, about the nostalgia of that week, how exciting it all was, and now how, because of my isolation, I was feeling a bit sad about things at times, and I wanted to regain that optimism and that delight and wonder that I experienced in that first week in Tokyo. And so I drew a scene of Shippo sitting on the Keisei line, that's the train line that runs from Narita Airport into Tokyo, sitting next to this strange gaijin to his left. Well, his left, my left. I'm never good at left and right, but basically this is ostensibly me. Maybe a slightly embellished version of me. And Shippo-chan is slightly curious, who is this strange person sat next to him? So I was kind of drawing Shippo quite a bit because it was a bit of a creature comfort. He was cute, it made me smile. It really is quite simple. And then one evening I went out, and it was around about August of last year, maybe a little bit before, and I was just getting some supplies, some food, some sort of lotions and potions, that kind of stuff. And when I got back in my car, just across from me was parked this very cute ice cream truck. And it just made me feel like, that's so nice. I don't know why, it just did. And so when I came back, I just had this idea pop into my mind. What if, instead of trying to chase down this story that I was trying to create, and still didn't really have any real ideas in my mind apart from some really janky stuff with people with superpowers saving the future kind of thing, or saving the situation, which I quickly dismissed as a load of old twaddle. I thought, well, let's do something that I can do, something that I'm going to enjoy, something that's going to bring me a bit of comfort and so forth. And I basically kept the idea of Shippo and Lanma's magical ice cream truck. It is just about as saccharine as it sounds. And so I began drawing the kind of things that I was feeling, essentially, a way of basically expressing myself. And so I started doing these little sketches in my sketchbook here, so you can see that Lam-chan is calming little Shippo-chan down, who has had a little bit of emotional moments. And that was the 11th of August last year. And through basically a variety of sketches, I showed Shippo primarily coming up with the idea of having an ice cream truck, a magical ice cream truck. And so I did these sketches. So here you can see Shippo is busily making his menu for the ice cream truck. But it's quite clear that I expressed other things that I was feeling at the time. Like sometimes I would be maybe a bit too over enthusiastic with people about ideas or when I met them. And I think some of it was very much because I hadn't really seen anybody for a long time, and I felt that maybe I was a bit too bouncy for my own good, and that people didn't react too well with it, that maybe I was a bit overbearing. And so I basically did this little scene of Shippo basically saying that maybe sometimes I'm too much for people. So maybe I was really expressing myself through these sketches, but all you need to know is that I was drawing Shippo and Lanma a lot. And so one day Shippo receives a postcard through the post from Lanma, who says that he's training, or well, as far as Shippo's concerned, she is training in China at the moment. So, and the reason I say as Shippo presumes she is because in my little skit, Shippo has no idea about Lanma's curse. And so Shippo is obviously delighted that Lanma's been back in touch. And so one day they arranged to meet up at a cafe, because we all know how much Lanma likes parfaits. And that's about as far as I got. Now in walks basically Lanma-kun. And Shippo's a bit like, who's that? Because obviously he doesn't know about Lanma's curse side. So I'm going to come back to this in a minute, but just bear that thought in mind. And so, story-wise, I was beginning to get a little bit of a better idea in my head of what I was going to be sort of trying to do. One of the things that's really occurred to me is that there is, I'd say there is a very pessimistic mood quite often portrayed about the future, shall we say. I think there are some things that we need to double down on to make sure that we don't wander into a dystopian sort of future where, you can certainly see that if certain things aren't dealt with in the world, shall we say, that we could end up with very unpleasant situations, shall we say. And I'm not going to get political because that's not what I want to do, but suffice to say that I've picked up, particularly in the West, a bit of a mood of pessimism in that. And so one of my ideas began to emerge about, well, what if there was some way for a character to be able to fix problems before they actually occur, kind of thing. And, obviously there are various influences on those kinds of ideas. But I was beginning to think about my own sort of, I felt like I'd lived in the past a little bit too much, particularly on arrival in Japan. I was very much just kind of retreating into my safe places with nostalgia. So I'm just looking at the time, and I'm almost at 15 minutes. But essentially, I felt like my nostalgia was very important to me. My past with video gaming and doing pixel art and all the things that I love from my childhood are very important to me. But they're not necessarily my future. I mean, they're a part of my future, but they aren't the entirety of my future. There is a whole life that I have not yet lived, kind of thing. And I began to feel like I was beginning to see a bit of light at the end of the tunnel of the isolation, because my Japanese was slowly but steadily improving. I was beginning to be able to communicate with people on a very, very basic level, but I've still been able to do it. And so that was beginning to make me feel a bit more optimistic again, and I began to recognise that whilst I may have had a fabulous week in Tokyo that week that I had when I stayed in Nerima, if I was actually living there, my start in Japan would have overall been not that much different than being in Miyako. You know, Miyako was not a problem. It wasn't a problem, kind of thing. The fact is that if I'd been in Nerima, in Tokyo, or anywhere in Tokyo working, I would have had different kinds of problems. At least in Iwate Prefecture, which Miyako City is in, I had a good degree of freedom. I was able to go out and about without too much fear about Corona. Now obviously that situation has slightly changed since we had our first cases here, but the fact is that no matter how much I enjoyed that first week, the fact it was in the past, and just as moving to Japan was a step taken out of optimism and hope for the future, there was a story to be told about hope for the future. And alongside all of that, I was learning a great deal about obviously what happened here 10 years ago with the Great East Japan earthquake and tsunami of 2011, which you may know as the Tohoku earthquake, the East Japan earthquake, you may know it as its Japanese name, the Higashi Nihon Daishinsai. But the thing is that being as I majored at university in geography and at school, one of the things that first got me really interested in Japan was not necessarily me having a Super Nintendo or a love of Japanese culture that I was reading in Superplay magazine, or just video gaming in general, or indeed manga and anime. It was in fact the Great Hanshin earthquake of 1995 in Kobe, which I've talked about before. And so learning about what happened here 10 years ago was something that, you know, was just naturally going to happen to me. I live at the foot of a tsunami wall. I live in a city that was very badly devastated by the tsunami, and indeed an entire region that was, you know, in parts obliterated. Lives were changed, wrecked, and, you know, transformed. Places were transformed, wrecked, beyond all recognition and so forth. And obviously there has been something of a renaissance and rebirth for these places. But I learned a lot about that. And it was beginning to settle in my mind that there was probably a story to be told about a hope for the future and optimism, the light at the end of the tunnel, shall we say, with what happened here 10 years ago, shall we say, a story of hope and, you know, battling fears and so forth. And that's really when all these ideas began to come together, and where we have Saki as so forth. I'm not going to spoil what happens in part 1 because you can read it right now, but you're going to begin to learn why she has a lot of fear and regrets in her life, and why she is not able to enact upon her dream of being able to live and work in Tokyo as a skate fashion designer. She's a keen skateboarder, she loves fashion design. This is a brief overview. I'm going to go into all these topics that I'm covering in a lot more detail over the coming months and years and so forth on this channel, amongst my other content. So I just want to give you an overview, but I think what you should hopefully see emerging is that I was working on a number of things at the same time. I wasn't specifically sitting down only to write the story and then create the characters, nor was I creating the characters and then hoping to come up with the story as a result of a personality, shall we say, and shaping the story around them. These things were kind of happening at the same time. There wasn't, you know, like a definitive storyline being written per se. There was notes at the back of notebooks. But I was just drawing characters and beginning to do my own characters and so forth, alongside various thoughts floating around in my head and a little bit of noting down my ideas. But one thing that happened in September of last year, and so these are my Japanese study notebooks. I don't have any particularly snazzy ways of learning Japanese or studying Japanese. I basically work from a textbook. I do use Wanikani for the kanji, but mostly I just work through my textbook and I make lots of notes. Now, I usually do pretty well. I mean, I, sort of do my kanji practice in here and so forth, and I will practice the kind of phrases and new kind of concepts that have been introduced in the textbook, in these books, but I will get distracted. I will do little sketches and stuff, and so what sometimes happens is that basically kanji goes out the window and I just basically start sketching any old character. Now this is where I'm going to bring back Shippo and Lanma. So let me just get the right page in here. Okay, almost. There it is. Okay, so Shippo and Lanma. So you can see that I didn't finish this one. Now this is where Lanma walks into this cafe, and basically Shippo is surprised, okay, because he doesn't know about Lanma's curse, shall we say. So he's not expecting Lanma-kun to walk in. And so in my Japanese study book, I was drawing ideas which haven't actually emerged in this. So you can see little Shippo has jumped underneath the table at the restaurant here. There's his little surprised face kind of thing. You can see that his little puzzled face did actually make it into the sketchbook. But the thing is that these bits never actually ended up in here. But what happened next is that I had been kind of drawing a character which a skateboarder. It was a slightly retro styled piece of pixel art essentially that I was working on. There was a car in it which was essentially a Mitsubishi Starion as it happens, and it was meant to be a scene from the 1980s, this purple haired girl kind of thing, and she was a skateboarder. Never finished that picture. We'll probably get around to it eventually. But what happened is I must have had this thought about, well, what if I combined one of Shippo's defining attributes with perhaps a bit of Lanma? So if I took the back of Shippo's hair, which is usually tied back, and combined that with the looks of Lanma, what do I get? I got this. And this is the first time that I can really definably say that I can trace back Saki from. Now there's quite a big difference, you can still see there's cute eyes and so forth. And this was, look, the 30th of September last year. So this was all the same day. And so this is the first time you'll see Saki's definable sort of ponytail that she usually has, or pretty much always has her hair up with, although we will see her hair in different styles. So on the same day, I then had a thought about, well, what if I combine it with Kuno Kodachi's eyes from Lanma? The more sort of, slightly more realistic eyes. And that's what we have here. That is the first time I can recognisably say that I drew something that was the first sketch that looked a bit like Saki. Still didn't have the exact story, but nonetheless there it was. And so from there I basically went through a process of refining that look, and I'm going to take you a little bit more into the details of that character design, the process that I went through to refine Saki and so forth, to give the final sort of look of her here. Now she is actually wearing, as you can see, a baseball cap here, so her hair is actually pulled through the back of the baseball cap, so her hair is sometimes a little bit different to this. You will see it just, flowing freely at the back where it's tied up. But yes, there was a bit more to designing Saki than just basically that sketch in the sketchbook and then just go, oh, this is how she's going to look kind of thing. But hopefully what you can see through these points is that I didn't necessarily set out to, as I say, finish the story or the characters one or the other first. It kind of all organically happened at the same time. And I think once I had the character traits of one of my main characters down, that allowed me to then think about how she fitted into those ideas that I was having as regards perhaps the Great East Japan Earthquake, about this looking backwards and so forth, and the rose tinted specs, and also that optimistic message that I ultimately wanted to give across. And I think the best expression of that is actually in the very literal title that my manga has, Future Saviours. It literally is about saving the future. I don't think I'm spoiling anything by spelling it out like that, because one of the reasons that I called this manga that is because I wanted it to be very clear, that this is going to ultimately about saving the future. But is it going to be about people with superpowers? Is this going to be about people who are finding extraordinary, sort of magical powers within themselves? No, it isn't. This is going to be about real people facing their demons head on, shall we say. But with a little bit more than that kind of thing. There's going to be lots of interesting things that are going to happen over the course of this manga, which I think you're really going to enjoy. So in terms of tips that I can give you if you're in the process of obviously trying to perhaps create a story yourself, I would say, number one, don't stress about it too much. You know, just let the process happen. Let things mull around your mind. I mean, it took me until mid-December of last year to actually nail down the story. It took me basically another 3 months or thereabouts from the point of actually beginning to define what Saki was going to look like, that I actually had a story that worked, kind of thing. So yes, it does take time, so don't immediately run with the first idea that you have either. You know, really think about it, note things down, mull it over a week later and think, does this still work, does this kind of suck, does this sound great still? That I'd highly recommend. But just keep your mind open with things, you know, don't just settle for the very first character that you draw, kind of thing. Just think, oh yeah, that's kind of cool, but really think about their interests as well. Now I'm going to go a little bit more deeper into the process of how I went about creating the story and so forth, the key moments along that process, and how even now I've slightly refined things. And likewise, I'm also going to go greater into the character design process. But in short, what I want to get across to you is that Future Saviours did not come about through designing Saki Endo, and likewise Saki Endo did not come about through writing the story to Future Saviours. They both kind of happened at the same time. It's a bit like the chicken and egg, and I feel that basically coming to Japan, you know, regardless of the isolation, actually gave me the headspace to properly think about those ideas that have been knocking around in my mind for quite some time. So obviously through these videos I can't give away a whole ton of things about what's going to happen to these characters and what the core messages are of Future Saviours, but I want you to bear in mind that if you've already read part 1 or about to, that Future Saviours is ultimately going to be a very, very positive message. It's going to have some pretty dark moments in it, it's going to have some pretty bleak moments in it, but it's also going to have some moments of real liberation and freedom and just basically pure fun. There's going to be plenty of laughs in it as well along the way, but there is going to be underlying quite a serious message. Yeah, it's going to be at times quite a tough read, and I feel that maybe part 1 starts off tough. In fact, it's arguable, as the manga starts on the 8th of March 2011, so 3 days before the terrible tragedy that happened here in Tohoku, as well as across Japan as well, but obviously majorly affected places like Iwate, Miyagi and Fukushima prefectures, that we're going to see quite a tough start to this manga. I have a feeling that I'm going to probably pull your emotions about quite a lot. So I hope you've enjoyed that bit of an overview of what came first. I've just looked at the time. That actually took me 30 minutes. Sorry, twice as long as I thought. It's always the way. Anyway, that's pretty much all I'm going to say. Yes, I look forward to reading your comments below, whether you've read the manga so far, what your thoughts are and so forth. You can read it online as a PDF, or you can sign up for an account on Pixiv. Both are good. It might be easier to sign up for an account on Pixiv because then you'll get notified as I add part 2 and so forth. Anyway, I guess all that remains for me to say is see you soon. Peace. I think I waffle way too much.